Speak out, don't just toe the line, 'cause the future's ours to write if we learn to read between the lines.
Hi guys, Paul Seils here from Between the Lines podcast. Today we're joined by Natalie Davis, the One Nation candidate for the upcoming federal election for the seat of Wright. Natalie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So can you give us a little bit of background about what's been your life, what's your journey until you reach this point in time in this equation?
Certainly. So I've known since I was probably 19 or 20 that federal politics was the destination for me. And so probably from, it was 2010, I ended up joining the Liberal National Party. I'd actually just finished my master's degree at that point, and thought this is the time. So I went along to an event and shortly after was signed up to the party and began really learning about the ropes, what was involved, how government works at a deeper level, and very quickly found that my area of major interest was policy. And so I joined the Education Policy Committee, part of the LNP's group of policies, not just education. I ended up becoming the Gold Coast Policy Chair, helped to draft policy to take to state conventions, went to state convention and would debate policy motions put to the floor. So policy, the area of policy really has always been an interest for me because you see our lives are governed by it. So we either have good policy or we have rubbish policy, and as a result, we live in our society. And what I've seen for a long time is that our country is very, very overgoverned.
Yes.
And we really need to get back to what the purpose of government is actually in place for. And I think we've lost sight of that. I think people have actually, the average person has disengaged from politics because they've actually lost track of what the purpose of government is as well.
Yes. Particularly in the post-COVID era where trust is at an all-time low at the moment, post-COVID.
Absolutely. But you see, COVID was able to happen. When I say COVID, I mean the policies around COVID happened because of that disconnect, because people had forgotten what their responsibilities as a citizen actually are in this nation.
Yes.
It's funny, you do meet people that say, I've never voted, or I'm not on the electoral roll, I won't be voting, or a whole raft of other excuses actually. But
yeah.
I constantly remind them, do you not realise that it's a privilege? People have actually died to have the right to vote, but it's also a responsibility. Democracy doesn't work effectively unless people are actually taking that responsibility. And so when we have an active society that's actually aware and taking seriously that responsibility, then we actually can get voted into government people that we need.
Yes. I think that's part of the intention, is to be able to, it's a podcast is called Between the Lines because people are wanting to read between the lines about what's happening. They don't trust the mainstream media anymore. It all seems to be controlled and...
Absolutely. So the control of the media, the control of music, the control of the arts, the control of every single thing that we see really has come back from the Frankfurt School. That movement from then has really, it identified early that those mediums were the way in which people could be manipulated, an ideology set.
Okay. I don't know much about the Frankfurt School at all. What's the origin of that? Do you know?
I don't know a huge amount about it, but the people that were at work in that time period and at that university, they were really key players in wanting to go down this track of communism.
Right.
Really.
Okay.
Or socialism. The idea of a few that were elites
yes.
governing the majority. And so that agenda has been quite hidden. We don't realise just how much communism is at play in this nation. It is dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a slippery slope because it's kind of like the analogy with the frog in the hot water. Mm-hmm. It's if we go back to the Frankfurt School, the planning there was long-term. So it's been a long-term plan to move us into this area. And basically any of the progressive changes that you're seeing in society, if we go back, we actually see that there was a plan for it all along, and most of it's come through particularly our medium of TV.
Yes, and social media now.
Yeah, for example, the destruction of the family, with the sexual revolution in the 60s, if you just look at TV programs alone, you see, and particularly sitcoms, you see the father portrayed as knowing nothing, as the dummy, as the no-hoper, the Homer Simpson.
Yes.
You see the mother feeling like she has absolutely no control. You see the children being portrayed as superior and knowing everything and being the smart ones. And so you look at our authority structures today and the rejection of authority towards teachers and police. It's of no wonder because the seeds were all planted in what these families were watching for all those years.
Social engineering.
It is social engineering, and now, of course, the access is even easier because you've got children with phones in their hands or iPads in their hands constantly without that supervision. Often, even young babies being given phones to keep them preoccupied. So we've really, that medium, or those mediums have been really utilised to engineer the situations that we have in our society to create that dominant ideology around who is right and who is wrong. You saw it with COVID, people that didn't want to get the jab were anti-vaxxers.
Yes.
They were the ones that were
public enemy number one.
A risk to society. I'm like, the average person didn't come up with those phrases. The average person didn't decide that, you were evil because you didn't take the jab.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Like the CIA engineering the concept of conspiracy theorist or
Correct.
cookers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how the transition now, here we are in 2025.
Yeah.
Pre-federal election.
Yeah.
Your role within One Nation and...
Yeah, so just to provide the link there, so during COVID, I knew that I was going to be moving to Beaudesert, and I was absolutely disgusted with how the Liberal National Party was handling the whole situation around COVID and people, and, I refused to be vaccinated, ended up losing my teaching position, and moved to Beaudesert. So I left the LNP and closed the door on all of that. And it was a couple of years after that I ended up moving to the States for 6 months. I went to the Rivers School of Government, received some training there on governance, and came back. As soon as I walked in the door, my pastor asked me, I think the same weekend, if I would host the candidate forum for the state election at our church. He'd already organised to have it there. It was something I hadn't ever done before, but I said yes. And little did I know that would end up being the launching pad for me to decide, number one, I was going to support One Nation in the upcoming state election. But then within a matter of about a week, I had also thought, actually, now that I go through all of their policies actually really do align with what I believe. On the whole, I'm actually going to see if I can run for One Nation. Because I knew all that time that was the call of God on my life, was for federal politics.
Yes.
So this decision to run has not been a light one. It's not been a sudden, eating too much pepperoni on cheese one night. It's been a long-term decision. There's been a lot of training involved in it, and I'm ready to make a difference for this nation
Great.
with a lot of prior thought to what needs to change.
Yes. So we touched on earlier as well, and I just wanted to mention to you, there's some people that have raised the concern that they may have voted for One Nation previously, and then those preferences, like if we look at the word preferences, like what do we prefer in lieu of, and I know you're going to touch on the preferential system, but they may be incomplete about what happened in the past where their preferences went to another party that they didn't really want to be supporting.
Yep. So the preference system isn't new. It was brought into Australia in 1989. Not 1989, sorry, 1918. And the first thing I want to tell you is that you can't ask us anymore where are our preferences going, because back a few years ago now, you were allowed to just put one in a box and the party would sort out the rest for you. You can't do that anymore. So your preferences, or One Nation's preferences, will go to wherever you want them to go to. It's not about where we put them, it's about where you put them. So on the House of Reps ballot, you will have to number every box. So we are not in control of where your preferences are going. You are totally in control of that. So you put the preference wherever you would like it to go. Just make sure you put One Nation number one. In the Senate, it's a little different, and people need to be aware of this. In fact, I wasn't aware of it until very recently. So in the Senate, you'll get this whopping great big long piece of paper, and you will have to number, and you'll have to make a choice. Am I going to vote above the line or below the line? That decision is entirely up to you. Below the line has individual candidates. Above the line has parties. So if you want to vote above the line, just stick with your parties, that's fine. What will happen is that the preferences will go to candidates in a particular order. For example, in Queensland for One Nation, Senator Malcolm Roberts is the first on our Senate ticket. So if we get enough, the first lot of, or the first quota that we get will go to him. If we fill that quota, if we get enough votes, which in Queensland you have to get, but works out to about 530,000 votes, or about 14 to 15% of the vote. So if we get that straight up, Senator Roberts will be elected straight back in. If we get more than that, if we got another 530,000, besides being amazingly wonderful for the people of this nation, because we'll now have two senators, well, three, including Pauline, in Queensland that can hold the government accountable.
Yes.
We'll also get an additional senator in our ranks, and that's what we want. We want that right round every state. We want, whether or not it's One Nation or other freedom-fighting parties, we need to help get as many senators in that Senate as possible to keep the government accountable, because the Senate is our backstop. So when you're numbering your Senate ticket, just make sure, yes, you only have to do 6 above the line. That is true. But if your 6 that you choose are very, very minor parties, you do risk your vote being exhausted. So you do need to make sure that you've got some parties in there that have that are a lot larger, like One Nation, like the Libertarians, for example, because we're going to need to make sure that when we end a quota and those extra votes go somewhere, that they're going to go somewhere that is going to pick up enough numbers to get another Senate seat for one of those, whether it's our party or another party. So
yes.
Topher Field's marble video, the second part of that video shows how the Senate works. It's not a technical video. It's actually a very, very basic video, but it's effective in demonstrating how that works. And I do encourage people, if you haven't seen that, definitely worthwhile having a watch of it, even if you just fast forward to the Senate part so you can see how that works.
Yes. So you mentioned Malcolm Roberts before. Malcolm's done a lot of great work.
He has.
Particularly in relation to if I remember historically, the cash ban. They attempted to make receiving or paying more than $10,000 in cash a criminal offence. I know last year Malcolm Roberts organised a lot of rallies around Australia preempting the digital identity bill.
Yeah.
I want to get across, and part of the intention for this information for this video and these videos is to educate those people that are perhaps somewhere in the political spectrum where they feel resigned about it's only going to be Labor or Liberal. Labor or Liberal are like so close to the centre and so homogenised these days, it's crazy.
Yeah,
they both support
the uni party on purpose.
Yeah, the uni party. They both support, Ukraine conflict, foreign conflict, Israel with the Gaza conflict, and I think the issue at this point in time is the most pressing issue with the majority of Australians is the cost of living.
Yeah.
And what can be done in that regard. I mean, I'd say how can we not have a inflationary crisis given the exorbitant amount of expenditure that happened during COVID? I think there's probably potentially a residue there given the fact that how some people view Pauline Hanson or the One Nation Party. But the thing is, we are dealing with a housing crisis and a housing affordability crisis.
Very much.
But the government is still bringing in another 750,000 or million immigrants in a year. Yeah. It beckons common sense and logic.
Yeah.
But people are very resigned about the fact that they're feeling hopeless or that the government no longer represents the people and they don't care about the people. They're just following other alternate agendas and narratives.
Yeah. Yes, you're spot on. Cost of living is something that has been mentioned over multiple elections. It's actually not even a new phrase, but certainly because of the massive amount of spending, people don't realise they hear this word about inflation and they don't realise what causes it. It's caused by spending. Now, that can be consumer spending, but it can also be government spending. And the problem is we've got a government that is out of control with spending. But can I tell you, it's not just the Labor government. It's the Liberal government. There's been this steady, a sudden increase and then this steady increase of putting our country into debt. And Paul, if you owned a bank, where would you make your most money?
In giving people loans for money? I would imagine.
And how are you making that money, Paul?
How am I making it?
Yeah. How's that money coming into you?
It's getting paid back to me in interest, and then on a debt-based fractional reserve banking system, and then I claim that as an asset, and then I lend out to whatever it is, 21 times that asset base.
So, Paul, people that own the banks, and I don't need to mention any names because you don't own a bank, do you, Paul?
Not.
You don't own a bank.
Unfortunately.
But there are people that own these banks and, geez, they seem to own a few. Then they're not typically Australians either, are they, Paul?
No.
No. So people that own banks really, really like governments to lend money from them because they make a lot of money. 22 billion a year, perhaps, from Australia at the moment.
Yeah.
At the moment. You know, we're $750 billion in debt, paying at the moment.
I think it's close to hitting $1 trillion.
I think it's we're almost there.
Yes.
And I just want, Paul, do you know how much we're paying to the United Nations?
I have no idea.
So, back in 2021, Malcolm Roberts had asked us at a Senate estimates meeting how much Australia pays the United Nations annually. And it was a really interesting response because they couldn't tell us. They could tell us what our assessed contribution was. And Malcolm knew that, so he already actually had the figures for them. And I think from memory it was about 82.4 million.
Well, they say a good lawyer or politician doesn't ask a question they don't know the
That's
answer
right.
to. Yeah.
But that was only our assessed annual contribution. That actually didn't include anything that we are signatory to. And we're signatory to a lot of stuff.
Yes.
So, for example, I think it was that same year, it was about 212 million was going towards peacekeeping. So that's not our defence force. That's just our contribution towards peacekeeping. And then you've got climate change. There's so many things that we are signed up to that we don't, as individual people, we have no clue. I wanted to be able to print a list of all the things we're signatory to, and I can't. Do you know why? Because at the bottom of the page, it was page after page after page after page after page. I have no idea how many agreements we are signatory to with the United Nations. That is not only controlling our legislation, but for the privilege of signing those documents, we also make contributions towards all those things and create departments in this nation for those things, which is why, for example, the climate change agenda, One Nation will scrap that department at a federal level, saving Australians $30 billion annually.
So what are we paying the United Nations for exactly?
To be signatory to those documents.
Right, just for the privilege.
For the privilege. So it begs the question. Oh, and by the way, the Senate estimates actually said to us that they couldn't tell us a single figure because it affected so many of our different departments, and so they actually didn't tell us.
Right, including national security, I guess.
So I would beg or guess that our annual contributions could well be even up to $1 trillion. We don't know. We won't know till we get in there and actually have a look at where that money is going. And it's why it's so vital, our commitment, One Nation's commitment to end ties with the United Nations, to end ties with the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, to get out of the UN Refugee Convention and the International Criminal Court, and probably a whole range of others. That's why that policy is so vital for the well-being of our nation, because when we actually cut off that spending and cut off that checkbook, it's actually going to reduce inflation immediately.
Yes.
Which will not just affect the cost of everything, but will actually affect interest rates. So there's a huge amount of, if you can think of a spider's web and see the nation of Australia stuck to that thing, that's what's currently happening, is that Australia's sovereignty at every aspect is being hampered because of our ties to the United Nations in particular. Okay, they're the ones that are driving education policy. You know, we wonder why there's this woke agenda policy. It's all coming from the United Nations. You know, it's not coming from a single teacher out there who wakes up one morning and says,
It's a good idea to be a cat.
Yeah, it's a good idea to be a cat. Why don't we put, neutral toilets in a school?
For 76 genders.
Why don't we have an area in the playground that's just for transgender kids? I know, we'll ask the school nurse if she can run a gays room in the school. No. That agenda is being pushed from the outside, and they've got people that are in strategic places.
Yes.
And particularly in political offices as policy advisors to our ministers, who have access to all the information and the ability to shade information that's given to the minister to brief.
Yeah.
So we've got big problems there.
I get what you're saying, and part of it as well is to have people being educated about what we call freedom or the conviction parties.
Yeah.
The potential to hold a balance of power.
Well, I'm not just going after a balance of power, and I just want to make that clear. And this is probably where I'll bring this in that I wanted to share with you.
Sure. This is in relation to preferential voting?
This is in relation to preferential voting.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that as well, because I think Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister of Australia under preferential voting with less than, 33% of the vote? Yeah.
Yeah. So what I've got here, I don't know whether you can see that on your screen. A lot of people think that one nation could never form government and it could never win a bunch of lower house seats. The reality is that they're wrong, and I want to explain how and why that is the case. Number one, there is a false conception out there that it can only be a Labor or Liberal Party that form government. That's not true. Any party that holds a majority of seats can form government, but it's this other side of not being able to win lower house seats that I want to address, because One Nation is in the best position it's been in to be able to win a whole bunch of lower house seats. And I want to show you how.
Right.
Back in 1918 was when a preferential voting system came in place in Australia. And in this slide, it's actually straight from Wikipedia, so you can look it up for yourself, but it's a good graphic. It shows that... Sorry.
Back up.
Yep, there we go. Just so I can see what I'm looking at. So William Gibson and... there we go. William Gibson and James Scullin were the candidates, and you'll see there that James Scullin actually won over 42% of the vote of the first preferences. But what was really interesting is that even though he won that percentage, he actually lost the seat. He lost the seat to a gentleman that only won just over 26% of the vote. But because of preferences rolling to him, he actually ended up winning with 56.3% of the vote. So it's quite incredible when you think of that. Because here's what I noticed from just some figures from the Gold Coast. So if we look at the last federal election, just on the Gold Coast seats, we've got Moncrief on 46%. We're talking about LNP wins here. Okay, so LNP won 46%, McPherson won 43%, Fadden was 45%, Ford was 37%, Wright was 43%. So most people think you'll never win the Gold Coast, you'll never be able to outpoll the LNP. We actually don't need to. And you did hear me right. Because just as James Scullin lost on his percentage, these guys could lose as well. Because you see, if you're someone who is not an LNP voter, then it's very likely that they're going to be putting the LNP very low down, if not last, on their ballot paper. So therefore, preferences, we only need to outpoll Labor. And when you're in an area that's an LNP stronghold usually, you don't have a lot of Labor supporters. Labor's on the nose as it is, federally and in our state currently in Queensland. And so all we really need to do is make sure we poll a lot higher than Labor. Preferences will come to us. People that are in the freedom, that are voting for the freedom friendly parties, as I like Topher's name for us. When they're voting for a conviction, they are putting 1, 2, 3, 4 freedom friendly parties. And so those preferences are going to continue to roll towards One Nation and for example, Qatar in the north. So we've got actually the best chance we've ever had, I think, to really capitalise on a large number of seats because of the discontent between the two Labor and Liberal uni parties. So I would just encourage people, number one, if you've previously voted in fear, because fear is a great motivator. The Liberal Party are using it currently. You'll see that their signage, they went back to an election style they did a few elections ago where everything was black and red and white to create this negative campaign against Labor. And see, what they'll do is they'll say you can't afford another year of Labor and make you fear Labor getting in. And so you'll vote, number one, for the Liberal Party and then number two for One Nation. Mm-hmm. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you put One Nation number one. If you seriously want change in this nation, you cannot vote the same way you've always done. You've got to do it differently this year. Put one for One Nation, mm-hmm. two for your other. In this electorate, Family First is a party that I value their values. Mm-hmm. But you've also got Patriot of Trumpets. You've got Jared Rennick's crew, People First. You can vote for them. Vote for us. Vote for all of those guys, 2, 3, 4. Vote for LNP if you want to have that as your safeguard vote. Or if you're a Labor, usually vote for Labor. Put your Labor member in there if you want them up, as that next backup. But vote with conviction. Vote for who you really, really want. And if they don't get up, who would you really want then? Because if you use your preference system properly, then this will actually benefit our nation, and we'll start to get candidates across this nation that we actually need to have change happen in our nation. So in the seat of Wright, I know that I'll outpoll Labor. For me, that's not a question. Mm. And I know that people are not happy with what they've seen from our current candidates, from our current members. In fact, if you're on the Gold Coast, I'll just tell you from experience, you've had them in play for 15 or so years. What benefit have you derived in 15 years from those members? Unless you've got some pretty solid evidence to say they did this, 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 and this for our country, not just your soccer club, but for the country, then why are they still there? Vote differently. Get smart, get to know who your candidates are, and actually vote with conviction. Mm-hmm. We can make a difference. One Nation can pick up enough seats right across this nation with the current discontent that exists and because of our preferential voting system. So yes. Let's make a difference.
Well, you did touch on, absolutely, and you did touch on this before. Yeah. There's stuff kicking around social media at the moment.
Yeah.
Saying certain freedom parties, including One Nation, are giving their preferential vote to the uni party.
Yeah, so clearly that's not true because, as I said earlier, your preferences go to where you want them to go. Mm. So we can't control where your preferences go. All we can do is give you a how to vote card, just say, if you're not sure how to vote, here's one way. Here's the way that we could recommend to you.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, every single person who goes to that polling booth is responsible for where their preferences go. It's not up to our party to tell you where your preferences go. We can simply offer you a suggestion if you want it.
Yes. So we talked about Malcolm Roberts before as well. I just want to get your position in relation to people who've got concerns about what's happening in relation to the digital identity agenda that was forced through the end of 2024 and also central bank digital currencies as well.
Yeah. Look, we will be aiming to be able to repeal that. From a personal perspective, I hope to go down as the person who has repealed the most amount of legislation in this over-governed country of ours.
Yes.
So the digital ID bill is certainly will certainly be put on the chopping block in our eyes.
Yes.
It was just a backdoor to get digital ID happening. Mm-hmm. The other concern that I have is when they know that it's a young person that's online, they're so much easier to be able to target. And with computers now all having their camera on them and kids being at school and being on computers all day, we have, as a parent, we just don't even have access to be able to monitor what's going on in front of our kids. So that's a real concern. But that digital ID bill needs to be quashed. There's no two ways about it. The currency side of things, that's a much bigger discussion. You could call our current money fiat money as it is, because our dollar is not based on gold.
No. It's not backed of anything in value.
No.
And the other part of it as well is that since 2020, there's been twice as much currency created in circulation as what there is now, which is also in adding to the inflation, given for every $10,000 that you had, it's now only got $5,000 worth of buying power.
Wow. I actually wasn't aware of that, Paul.
Yeah.
So that actually makes a whole lot of sense and explains why things have gone up so dramatically. And see, this is the problem. When you don't own the bank, you don't have control over that. And so we do need to address this. Malcolm has been very, very strong and consistent about calling for a public bank.
Yes.
We desperately need to go back to having gold as the standard that our money system is based against. But that is a massive discussion.
Yeah.
But we've got a lot of gold in this nation.
Yes, we have a lot of resources.
We've got a lot of gold in this nation that is being heritage listed area, so that people don't get access to it as well, I might add.
Right.
And on top of that, I believe our country now has 56% native title over it.
Right.
So again, we've got to look at what is going on and who it is that's making these decisions to suddenly say, oh, you can't use that land, because I don't remember the people of this nation telling the government that it owned everything. We set up governments to manage. Just to go back to the principle we mentioned right at the start.
Manage is a very loose term.
It is a loose term, but right at the very start, we spoke about, I mentioned that our sovereignty is under attack.
Yes.
And I mentioned that there is a purpose for government. The purpose for government is to punish evil and promote good.
Idealistically, yes.
And our federal government, bigger picture here again, when our states got together and federated, they created the federal government to have a very limited and defined authority. What that means is that they didn't say, federal government, you have authority over all of us states, and whatever you say goes. And that's what we think. That's what most people think the federal government is. We think we have this local, state, federal government system, and the feds are over everything. Wrong. Our federal government is not over everything. Our federal government has a rule book called the Constitution. And a lot of people wave the Constitution around. The Constitution is like a rule book for a soccer match or a football match. It tells the government what it can and cannot do, what it is responsible for, and who it is responsible to. When we look at that, and we look at the way that our federal government is currently operating, there is an issue. Actually, it's quite a large issue. One of the things that Senator Roberts has brought out is that we are going to make sure, by getting into government, that we are going to bring that federal government back into line with the Constitution and get rid of the assumed responsibilities that are happening in our nation. And we're going to make the states take responsibility for the things that they are still responsible for as sovereign entities. Most people don't realise that the states are sovereign entities because they think that they're subservient to the federal government. It's not the case. The only time the federal government has legislation supersedes state legislation is when it's something that they have been tasked with according to the Constitution, which is why the conscription of the jab during COVID was unconstitutional. And the states had no right at all to insist otherwise. because in that instance, the federal legislation supersedes the state. There is a very important reason that the federal government exists, and it is for the betterment of the nation as a whole. So I do encourage people to have a look, get hold. You can rock up to your local MP's office and get copies of the Constitution free. Just go and pick one up. You can also get it online. How do you know that your rights aren't already taken away if you don't know what they are in the first place? So the Constitution actually, it tells us some of those things. We actually don't necessarily need a Bill of Rights like the states. You see, government only has a limited amount of authority. You can't have authority over what you weren't given. There are things that, freedom of speech, the government did not give us our freedom of speech. So if they didn't give it to us, how can they take it away? So, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, they are God-given institutions. They're not things that man can take.
Okay, so let's talk about freedom of speech.
Yeah.
So freedom of speech, some people were a little bit upset with One Nation about the fact that Pauline and Senator Malcolm Roberts abstained from voting, where we got to saw Peter Dutton stand before the anti-Semitism summit with his kipper on, talking about anti-Semitism, and then for whatever reason, Pauline and Malcolm Roberts decided to abstain from voting.
Yeah. So I just want to explain that a lot of people, because I saw on the social media side of things, that hit the fan at the time.
Yeah.
Number one, it wasn't a hate speech bill. It was a hate crimes bill. And the timing of that was in line with what was going on towards Jewish people and synagogues. So it was actually a hate crimes bill. And Senator Malcolm Roberts, I wondered myself at the time, what happened? What happened there? And I had the benefit of attending a meeting, I think 2 days later, where Senator Malcolm Roberts stood up and explained what had happened during that debate. Number one, they were only given a very limited amount of time to even...
And he did say that, in his opinion, that the vote wouldn't have made any difference to the outcome.
Absolutely. So in Parliament, he explained that when a MP chooses to abstain from a vote, that's considered in Parliament a protest vote. Now, they agreed in principle with the principle of that bill to deal with the crimes, the violent crimes that were being perpetrated against Jewish people. Not just them, but at the time that was the
Which
context.
is interesting as well, because the term a Semite is someone of Middle Eastern origin. So whether they're Jewish or Palestinian,
True, absolutely.
the knife cuts both ways.
Absolutely. So it was just that the context in the time, that was what was happening in our society. We're seeing these attacks on the mosques, not the mosques, the synagogues. But we've seen it in Christian churches. We've seen it in mosques. End of story. We needed to deal with the violence towards groups of people.
And some of those have subsequently been proven to have been fabricated.
Right. So the bill itself was targeting the violence towards individuals. So in principle, they agreed. However, what the bill also included was a heap of stuff that would hinder and hamper freedom of speech. And it was very similar, really, to stuff that they had brought into the Respect at Work bill in Queensland, where they were really trying to drill down people's the offending side of things. If people got offended, and symbols, hate. What constituted a hate symbol?
Yeah, but maybe some overlap there around the misinformation, disinformation bill.
They were just chucking it all in the same bill, shaking it up and seeing what they could get through, because they knew that the community wanted a response from government, and so government thought, we'll use this as our opportunity to push a whole bunch of stuff through, because if they don't vote for this bill, it will make it look like they weren't supporting these people after all. So it was actually a very devious bill. And so as a result, they couldn't vote against it because in principle they agreed with parts of it. But they couldn't vote with it because it would hinder all of the freedom of speech stuff that they'd been fighting for.
Yes.
So they were between a rock and a hard place. They're damned if they did, damned if they didn't. And so the only thing that they could do was abstain. It would not have mattered whether they voted against it because it still was going to push through. So and they knew that. So they abstained from that vote. What really hurt during that time, though, was that Jared Rennick had actually put up a media post which indicated that they had voted for it with the government. And that really hurt because you got two freedom parties that usually are fighting the same type of fight that suddenly were,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I didn't have the context that abstaining was a protest vote, whereas Rennick was inferring that an abstinence was voting for it. That's what he was implying.
Well, Malcolm certainly took it up with him, and he had said, I'll look into it, and didn't pull it down. And I was disappointed, I must admit. I've been a big supporter of Jared's push against all of that rubbish, everything that he has been standing for in terms of, the COVID vaccines and woke agendas. So I was disappointed because of what I saw there.
Yes.
And I just hope that would never happen again. But Malcolm and Pauline, myself, and certainly other candidates, we're part of One Nation because of the principled stance that we take towards the right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to actively participate in your religion. So we would never vote against freedom of speech. So I would just say to people, if you ever hear of something online and it doesn't seem right, get in touch with your MP. Ask the question. Don't just jump on don't just react on social media
as if it's true
and perpetrate, more of the same lie. Because if you actually stop and ask someone, you might actually find that it could even be other parties that are sowing some of that misinformation in order to create that division. It's a commonly done thing. Okay. So I hope that clears that up.
It does, thank you. So in closing, anything else that you want to leave us with in relation to moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. Number one, I want you to know that I am a person of conviction and I am a Christian. So my stance will always be filtered through that belief. And I won't shy away from that. Number two, cost of living. We're not just talking about it. We've actually got a specific plan to deal with it. We mentioned about disconnecting from the UN. We are actually going to help families. I mean, really help families, like reducing excise on their petrol by 26 cents a litre. We're going to change the national energy market rules so that the cheapest form of electricity has to be utilised first by providers, which comes back to coal. And that will actually cause our electricity prices to go down by around about 20% straight away. We are also the party that cares about families, so we're going to let families that have got a dependent child submit a joint tax return. That policy is going to save people thousands.
Yes.
Because I love the fact that One Nation believes that the best person to raise the children are the parents, especially between that 0 to 5 bracket.
Yes.
So it means if mum wants to stay home and look after the children and dad's going to work, instead of dad getting slogged with all the tax, they'll be able to share his income over the two of them and therefore save a huge amount of tax. Hypothetically, and it is a larger amount, but if dad was on $120,000, they'd be able to share that income. It would save them just under $10,000 just in tax.
Yes.
So that's a benefit. Veterans are going to be able to, veterans and pensioners are going to be able to work without affecting their pension if they want to. And we're increasing the tax-free threshold for self-funded retirees to $35,000 a year. So that will also help with our pensioners. In addition, we are going to remunerate GPs a whole lot better, which means that they'll be able to go back to bulk billing. So we've got a lot of families that, particularly out in our regional areas, a lot of the people in regional areas are just heading to their hospitals because they don't have the money or they can't get into a GP. So we're wanting to be able to help people.
Yes.
For homes, the housing crisis, we're going to put a pause on immigration.
Great.
We are going to deport 75,000 illegal immigrants. We're going to ban foreign ownership and require those who are foreigners to sell to an Aussie within 2 years. That will help put downward pressure on housing prices. But then for people that are wanting to get into a home and to actually get a loan and build, we're going to take the GST off building supplies for builds up to $1 million. That's going to be a massive saving. When you consider something like 44% of a cost of a house is in taxes, that's huge.
Yeah.
So there's a whole raft of savings. They've already identified about $90 billion of savings immediately and the ability to be able to put $40 billion back in people's pockets. So it is, and that's just starting. Once we get in there and we actually find where all of this money is actually going, we will be able to do a whole lot more. And heck, we might even be able to fix the Bruce Highway.
Wow.
So
I joke with people about it and say, never give up on fulfilling yourself and improving yourself, even if it takes a lifetime, just like the Bruce Highway.
Just like in door knocking, my gosh, I've done a lot of door knocking, but roads has been one of the big things that people have told me need improving. And, the fact that we can't even get on top of that at the moment is ridiculous. We can donate billions of dollars to the United Nations, but we can't actually address our own needs, our own country. Investing in manufacturing, investing in our farming communities, investing in significant water infrastructure, dealing with the fire ants debacle that we currently have, and that's a big, huge issue, particularly here in the Scenic Rim and Lockyer region.
Thank you, Biosecurity Act.
Just so you know, I have been onto that all this week, and we are developing a policy right now on that to help our farming community, because the overreach into I'm just going to call it what it is, the trespassing that is going on in this nation regarding the fire ant treatment and this debacle of a program which started in 2001. It is a failed program. It's a failed program that has made it impossible for these people that are treating fire ants to be unemployed. It's an absolute ploy. It's just a waste of our taxpayer money.
Yes.
And it's time to hold the government to account. So I just encourage you, please vote with your conscience. Vote for One Nation. I'm Natalie Davis. I'm One Nation's candidate for the seat of Wright, and I am fighting for our local community, and I'm also fighting for our nation, for our nation's sovereignty, and I will not back down. I will deliver what I'm saying that we will deliver. We're going to get this country back on its feet, and we're going to see Australians and this nation and the businesses of this nation prosper again.
Wonderful. Well,
thanks, Paul.
My mum loves you, and she's one of your constituents, so good luck, Natalie Davis.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Between the Lines podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you could please follow and subscribe to any of our YouTube channels, Spotify, social media platforms, etc. And we're also seeking any potential partnership and sponsorship opportunities that might exist. So please contact us if you have any interest in that. You can find us via our website, which is btl.com.au. unchecked.media. Thank you for joining us until we dig into our next story, Between the Lines.